Now, the bean belt, which you may hear of, is literally like a belt that stretches from across the globe, and this belt is recognized by a loose northern boundary and a loose southern boundary where the majority of coffee in the world does grow. Now, why would there be a belt? Okay, this is not equal to the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. It's actually a little further south than that. But it's similar in that appearance because it does include those areas of the world which receive the ideal rain, the ideal temperature ranges, and of course then the elevations required to grow coffee. So when we look at this map, you can see, parts of Mexico are not included, but they should be. Parts of South America not included, but they should be. China is growing coffee, India, and so certain points of this would stretch north or south to include other growing regions. But the point of this, which I'd like to get back to, is, as we know, the birthplace of coffee was Ethiopia, or where we really discovered it. Now, the Rubiaceae plant spread all over the world from that region of Ethiopia, and it was spread by animals, traders, settlers. All right, so people picked it up and they traveled and they planted it in other countries. Animals naturally eat the fruit, travel to some distant area, especially birds, and drop the seed. Now, something important to know is in 1715, a big journey. Okay, so fast forward 1,000 years from our goat story, the French took the coffee plants from Yemen. Okay, so that would be north, working its way into kind of the Arabian Peninsula already. They took coffee plants from Yemen to the island of Bourbon, or Reunion. This was to help the global spread of the coffee species. And it's very important to know, as one of the major species of Arabica today is also bourbon coffee, or Bourbon. You'll have to excuse me, my French is absent. The coffee plant is especially particular about its climate, and so those seasonal temperatures and growing conditions, as I explained in the coffee belt, will give us that majority countries falling within these lines. So how many countries might you be able to name which produce coffee? You can write some down and they'll be shown on the next slide. Now, I've got a note here about Congo, or West Central Africa, and this is kind of the home to Robusta. So Eastern Africa, the Horn of Africa, that's where Ethiopia was first spotted. But Robusta was first discovered in more of Western Central Africa, maybe Congo. And we just don't talk about that story as much because it's not as relevant to specialty coffee, although Robusta has been making great progress in recent years, which is very exciting. Now, bean belt, all right? So I asked you how many you could name. You should be aware of several of these names. We'll highlight some of the most important, but you'll see here maybe some surprising places that you haven't tried coffee from before. How many of you have had Australian coffee or Cameroonian coffee, right? Cuban coffee. Often we hear of Cuban coffee, but it's more of a style of coffee. Some of these places to find coffee that has been grown and exported from them, the Ivory Coast, there are some small growing regions, but it's also exciting because coffee is a very important agricultural crop around the world, and we'll look at some of the farmers and how they grow, and that's important to know for our exam as well. So the main key here is that if you locate these countries on the map, you will find that they're falling within or very close to those coffee belt lines. And also understanding that the soil conditions and the altitude and the climate, these all affect the flavor that we will find in the coffee. All right, so world production. Now, what's so special about Brazil? Brazil is the largest coffee producing country. That means in terms of volume, no one in the world grows more coffee than Brazil. However, which country produces the most Arabica coffee in the world? If you guess Brazil, you're also right. Brazil grows the most Arabica coffee compared to any other country, and it grows the most total coffee. So why are we saying that's different? Well, because Brazil is growing both Arabica and Robusta, and you add all the Arabica and Robusta coming from Brazil together, and it's more than any country in the world. So can anyone guess, especially looking at our picture, which country produces the most Robusta in the world? If you guess Vietnam, good job. Process of elimination. Yes, so you'll definitely want to know where the most Arabica is coming from, Brazil, where the most Robusta is coming from, Vietnam, and where the most coffee in general, one country in the world, Brazil. So just for bonus points, who consumes the most coffee in the world by volume? Okay, so this might be a larger region, not just one country, but North America and Europe consume the greatest volume of coffee. And then which country consumes the most coffee in the world per capita? And this statistic might be a little old. Maybe someone's taken on the challenge of competing with Sweden for most coffee per capita. So that would basically mean if you took all the people in the country and divided all the cups of coffee drank in the past year by that number of the population, Sweden, they're averaging more cups of coffee than anyone else. Okay, now we're going to go on to a coffee's journey. So here we've got 10 really helpful steps. If you can lock into this picture and really kind of own this thought process, this will guide you through all kinds of your courses here with the SCA. So obviously planting, right? So we're talking about the farm level, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but that's often small farms, private farms, family farms all over the world. And then those same farmers, it could be a corporation or it could be a commercially owned field, then obviously they're going to harvest the cherries. They're going to harvest the coffee fruit. You don't harvest the beans, you harvest the fruit. If you ever had the chance to go on a coffee expedition and visit one of the farms, definitely recommend you do that, and hopefully it's during the harvest season so you can understand just how hard these farmers work. Imagine climbing steep hillsides with a basket strapped to your waist, and try not to slide down the mountain while you're picking coffee cherries. Then third, processing the cherries. Now this will also often happen where at the farm it's been grown and harvested, cared for by a small farmer or even a larger collective, and then it's sent off somewhere to a processing center. So that could just be the town, or it could be another town remotely. Okay, so transportation starts to come in here. And then after the coffees have been processed, whether they're wet or dry or machine or water's used or not used, you're going to be moving into a phase where the coffee needs to be dried. Now this phase, drying and then milling, we could use these interchangeably, especially the pictures that I have here on this. So you would dry the coffees if they well, either way, we need to dry the coffees. Let me skip. The picture used for number 5 is a little misleading because you see red, juicy fruit on it. Okay, so when we mill the coffee beans or mill the cherries or mill them from the parchment, they may come to the miller in a number of varieties. Okay, so they could still be on the fruit. They could be in dried fruit. They could be in husks. They could be partially in fruit. So there are a number of things that happen here, drying, milling, and then drying even again after the milling. Okay, so then there's going to be some kind of a packaging and storing process. We need to export the coffees. So again, transportation. These are going to be shipped all over the world. Storage conditions are super important. And maybe earlier in the stage, but definitely again, we need to sample and test the coffee. Okay, so this is often going to happen before it's sold on the world market or before it's shipped out of country, but the coffee should be tested at multiple times. Then there's going to be roasting, right? Sample roasting, large batch roasting. There's probably going to be more testing and dialing in. And of course, before you can use roasted coffee beans, you got to grind them. You grind specifically for your brewing device. And then there's a service element, whether you're consuming it yourself or whether you're a barista serving a customer. Okay, so all of these hands and all of these steps, there's so many things that could happen. And how many of these steps can really improve the internal nature of that coffee? None. People might beg to differ if processing they think can somehow improve it. But really, each of these steps from the farm forward is just looking to preserve or bring out the coffee quality that is locked within. So much of this begins with the farmer, with the land, with the growing, with the harvest, and basically after the coffee is grown, we're just in a race to preserve that quality and to bring it out to the best possible. Okay, so we talked about coffee farmers, and smallholder coffee farmers is something that I'm very glad has received a lot of attention in recent years, and that's because these coffee farmers they've been doing this for generations, some of them hundreds of years, right? And just now, we're starting to finally tell their stories. And media and film and the internet and world travel is making more of this possible. But often these people, they own a small plot of land. Maybe it's passed from generation to generation. Or maybe they even have to rent the land that they're living on and growing on. They're often self-working, family-operated, right? It could be a small group of people or a village type operation, but the smallholder coffee farms make up a large percentage of the coffee that we consume each year. And while those numbers constantly change, and I don't have them now, it's important to know that there are a lot of hands touching the fruit that we enjoy so much in our morning beverage, in our afternoon beverage, or whenever we're drinking coffee. Here's a quick little snapshot. Again, if you have the chance to visit a farm, I really encourage it. From the seed to plant to flower to fruit. After harvest, there's a cleaning and a processing. There's shipping. All of these, as I said, are important steps in the coffee industry. So the goal on this slide is really to emphasize that we see people picking with their hands. And you might hear this called selective picking. Selective picking must be hand picking because the goal of selective harvesting is to single out those ripe red cherries, or ripe yellow, ripe purple, whichever variety you're harvesting, and you leave the others on the plant to continue to mature, maybe some days or weeks until you come through and you selectively pick them again. Whereas you will hear of strip picking or machine harvesting, where a machine or even a human, right, can take from the base of the branch and strip that branch, and all of the cherries come. This is typically done when the cherries are a little overripe, so that the majority of the coffee can be ripe or overripe, but some will still be green. Now, why is that important, and how does that affect quality? Right? Well, we've got all these different variables: the growing region, the geography and altitude, sunlight, daylight, nighttime temperature, soil quality, mineral and diseases, planting, pest control, harvest conditions. All of these things are so important. And then just to finish the job randomly, right, and just strip it or use a machine to pick it. So much of these terroir, or the land variables, are lost. And a lot of commercial coffee will be strip picked. So we don't want to say it's bad. It has its place and there is a purpose for it. But ideally, our specialty coffee will be selective picked or hand picked.